how do you actually prove a human rights violation when the government committing it just calls it, a standard traffic stop?
Right, or like a routine administrative summons.
Exactly. And today we are opening up a ledger of systemic abuses to see exactly how monitors try to untangle that highly engineered camouflage. So welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here, and we've got a lot to cover today.
We really do. Today our mission for you, the listener, is to take a magnifying glass to a really highly specific and honestly very sobering document. It's the Global Shia Rights Watch April 2026 Monthly Violations Report.
Yeah, and the scope of this is, well, it's intense.
It is. This document aims to track human rights violations committed against Shia Muslims over just one single month, using the organization's own sources, plus, public human rights groups on the ground.
And focusing on just a single month, that's what makes this material so structurally revealing, for us looking at it.
How so?
Well, we are zooming in on this tight chronological window, right? Just April 1st to May 1st, 2026. And that removes all the noise of, historical grievances. It forces us to look squarely at the current mechanics of it all.
Right. You get to see exactly how these monitors categorize and document the systemic issues in real time.
Exactly. Month by month, tracking the day-to-day machinery of discrimination.
But before we get into that machinery, I really need to explicitly pause here and clarify the boundaries of this deep dive for you listening.
Yeah, this is a really important caveat.
Extremely important. This material contains politically sensitive, highly charged content. It involves multiple governments, militant groups, regional conflicts.
Yeah.
So we want to be exceptionally clear with you. Neither of us are taking any political sides today.
Right. No left or right biases here.
None. We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the Global Shia Rights Watch or any government or any political faction mentioned in this report.
Our sole purpose today is to impartially report on the factual data and, the structural ideas contained within this specific source text.
Right. We are just exploring the methodology and the findings presented so you can understand exactly what is inside this document. Nothing more, nothing less.
Absolutely.
And the reason you should care about this is that, well, we so often hear about global conflicts in these really broad, vague strokes.
Right, constantly. You hear phrases on the news like, tensions are rising.
Right, or sectarian unrest continues, which, honestly, it makes the violence sound like bad weather, like it's just this unavoidable force of nature.
Yeah, like it's just happening passively.
Exactly. But this report, it shows us the actual blueprints. It splits, effectively, into different methodologies of oppression.
And the first one is very procedural.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this. We need to look at the bureaucracy of repression. It's like looking at a ledger of systematic disenfranchisement. This isn't chaotic violence, it's administrative.
It treats religious identity almost like a bureaucratic technicality that just needs to be managed.
Right. We are looking at countries where the SRW claims discrimination is occurring through state apparatuses. So, police summons, courtrooms, the legal system. Let's look at Kuwait, for example.
Yeah, the April 16th arrests.
Exactly. The report details these arrests, and it isn't just a random sweep of anonymous citizens. The targets are highly specific. You have prominent former members of parliament, like Adnan Abdul Samad and Dr. Khalil Abdullah Abul.
And it doesn't stop at politics. It extends into academia, too.
Right. The head of the English department at Kuwait University, Dr. Ahmad al-Musawi, he was also arrested.
What's fascinating here is the specific pattern that the SRW is trying to illuminate. They're documenting instances where the state apparatus is being mobilized against high-profile individuals within a minority group.
Wait, so if we look at the professions,
Yeah.
An academic, a prominent cleric, a lawmaker, the objective isn't really about what these individuals supposedly did.
Well, in a functioning democracy, an arrest is ideally an isolated response to a specific crime, right? But the SRW is arguing that when you map out the professions of those detained, it suggests an attempt to remove societal influence and leadership, not just, individual dissidents.
So the objective is visibility. By targeting a university department head, the state isn't just silencing one critic, they are weaponizing that person's status.
Exactly. Taking a university department head out of society sends this chilling message to every student they mentor.
Wow.
It basically tells the minority population, hey, if we can unilaterally vanish someone with a massive public platform, your anonymity certainly is not going to protect you.
Man, and the scale of this bureaucratic approach is really striking when you look at the data from Bahrain.
The numbers there are very high.
Yeah, in just the previous month, so March 2026, The Bahrain Prisoners Affairs Authority reported 204 individuals arrested, and by April, 193 of them were still in detention.
And the sentences being handed down by the courts in April are, well, they're severe.
They really are. Your national football player, Ahmed Mirza Musa, given a 5-year sentence. A media figure, Bakir al-Kamil, sentenced to 10 years.
And the SRW highlights cases that really point to the seemingly arbitrary nature of this.
Right, like Ali Matuk.
Yes, a visually impaired detainee who was sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Which is just, how does a human rights report draw the line there?
Well, this brings up the critical framework of international law that the report relies on, specifically Articles 9 and 10 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Remind us what those are.
Sure. So Article 9 protects against arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. And Article 10 guarantees the right to a fair and public hearing by an independent tribunal.
Okay, so the SRW documents these heavy sentences in Bahrain, or the arrests in Kuwait, to build a case that these articles are being systematically bypassed. But I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a skeptical observer here. If a state says, look, this person broke a public assembly law, or they're a threat to national security, how do monitors differentiate between a state's standard security measures and what the SRW defines as arbitrary detention? Because, the state always claims it's just following its own laws.
It's an excellent question, and honestly, it's the hardest part of human rights documentation. Monitors have to look for irregularities that betray the legal facade.
Like what kind of irregularities?
Like a lack of due process, or denial of legal representation, or in some cases, coordination that suggests a non-judicial motive.
Oh, like this Saudi Arabia and UAE situation in the report.
Yes. That cross-border incident is a perfect example. Saudi authorities arrested a cleric named Mustafa al-Namir from Al-Asa, and at the exact same time, his 2 sons were detained across the border in the UAE.
And the SRW notes this happened without any provided justification, right?
Right. You just don't see 2 different countries' legal systems spontaneously and simultaneously process warrants for a father and his sons without an underlying coordinated effort.
So the argument is that the synchronicity of those arrests exposes that it isn't about local law enforcement at all. It's a coordinated targeting of a family unit.
Exactly. And furthermore, the report notes that while these arrests are happening, Saudi authorities actually permitted a group promoting sectarian hate speech to operate freely in Al-Asa.
Wow. So by documenting what the state actively punishes versus what the state passively permits, the SRW illustrates this structural bias.
It's all about contrasting those 2 realities.
Well, when a state uses its legal system to systematically erase a community's leaders, it creates a massive power vacuum.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
It really does. And into that space steps our next focus: non-state extremists. This is where the report shifts from courtrooms and police summons directly into regions where civil order has just completely fractured.
Yeah, this is where the documentation shifts from tracking administrative violations to tracking the complete breakdown of the fundamental right to life.
Leaving civilians entirely exposed to extremist violence.
Right. The report highlights sudden, highly lethal attacks on civilians in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan.
The numbers documented here are incredibly grim. In Afghanistan, on April 10th, an armed extremist group attacked a religious gathering in Herat. 11 civilians were killed.
And the report specifically notes that this included women and children.
Yeah. And then over in Pakistan, extremist militants executed a suicide car bombing in Damel and then an armed attack in Quetta, killing multiple civilians across both incidents.
And while those incidents are devastating, the SRW dedicates the vast majority of its documentation for April 2026 to one specific country.
Syria.
Yes, Syria emerges as the absolute epicenter of this systemic violence.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and interesting in terms of how rigorous the SRW's methodology is in tracking this chaos. Because if the first section was a scalpel, this section is a sledgehammer.
That's a good way to put it.
The report is showing us an ecosystem of abuse. You aren't just unsafe at a protest, you are unsafe farming your fields, or working at a tobacco plant, or literally just sitting in your living room.
That's the most crucial takeaway from the Syrian section. The violence permeates every single layer of daily life.
We're talking about farmers. On April 3rd, 2 farmers, Mohammed Hafez al-Ali and Yusuf Muhammad Ali, were shot and killed while just working their land in Hama.
Or Dr. Mohammed Karam Basel, who was abducted simply while returning from a village.
And perhaps the most chilling, on April 7th, armed assailants stormed a home and murdered an entire family: Salim Assad, his wife, and their daughter. just in the home.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this Syrian data reveals a complete collapse of civilian protection. And the mechanism of this violence is highly calculated.
How do you mean?
Well, the report extensively documents a systemic use of extreme torture. This isn't just collateral damage in a firefight. We see individuals like Osama Ali al-Khalaf, who died under extreme torture just days after being arrested.
Or Fadarati.
Right, who died 10 days after his release because the torture he endured was so severe.
And the report also notes how even the dead are weaponized, right? Bodies are frequently discovered bearing signs of torture.
Yes, dumped publicly. It's essentially a broadcast.
A gruesome billboard telling a specific demographic that they have no safe harbor anywhere.
Exactly. The strategy of these armed groups isn't just about territorial control, it's psychological warfare. They use abductions, torture, and the public dumping of bodies to force mass displacement.
Right, and they pair this physical terror with economic and cultural erasure, too.
Yeah, they use every tool available to accelerate that demographic shift.
The economic angle is fascinating and terrible. Dozens of employees were dismissed from the General Tobacco Company in Latakia, and the SRW explicitly states this was solely due to their sectarian affiliation.
Firing people from a tobacco plant isn't just about giving jobs to your own faction, it's about making a specific demographic financially unviable.
If you can't feed your family, you have to leave. It's an administrative form of ethnic cleansing.
And add to that the cultural erasure. The report documents armed groups seizing the shrine of Sheikh Ahmad al-Jazari.
Right, physically preventing civilians from accessing their own religious sites.
When you combine the economic deprivation, the cultural erasure, and the extreme physical violence, the ultimate goal becomes clear. They want people gone. You see this when residents were forced to flee Nab el-Tayeb after an attack.
The terror is the tool used to cleanse the area. But, reading through this report, the scope suddenly widens massively toward the end.
It does, yeah.
We move from individual farmers being targeted to looking at the indiscriminate fog of war. The report dedicates a specific section to civilians caught up in massive regional military operations.
This is a major shift in the document. They pivot from tracking individual verified names to citing preliminary data from ministries of health.
Right. For Iran, they rely on preliminary data from the Iranian Ministry of Health from the end of April 2026. The report notes over 300 and 400 total fatalities.
And within that, they specifically record 1,701 civilian deaths, noting 496 women and 216 children.
And for Lebanon, using data as of April 30th, they document 2,586 fatalities and over 8,000 injuries. So what does this all mean?
It's a huge shift in scale.
It is. I look at these massive casualty numbers in Iran and Lebanon, and I struggle to see how the SRW can classify this as a specific human rights issue for a religious minority rather than just, the tragic reality of war.
That's a fair point.
I mean, when a massive bomb drops, it doesn't check sectarian ID cards. Are they claiming these bombs were specifically targeted at their minority, or is there a broader point here?
This raises an important question about international law. The SRW is making a much broader point here. To understand it, we have to look at the legal framework they invoke, which is the Geneva Conventions.
Okay.
The SRW raises formal concerns about military operations complying with two fundamental principles: distinction and proportionality.
Okay, let's unpack those two terms for a second, because distinction and proportionality sound very clinical for something as chaotic as modern warfare.
Right, they do. So distinction is the absolute requirement that militaries must separate combatants from civilians. You can only target combatants.
And proportionality.
Proportionality acknowledges that civilian casualties sometimes happen, but it dictates that the anticipated civilian harm cannot outweigh the direct military advantage.
But how does that even work in modern asymmetric warfare? If an armed group embeds itself within civilian infrastructure, like a residential neighborhood in Lebanon, proportionality becomes a devastating ethical gray area.
It absolutely does.
If a military drops a bomb on that neighborhood, who is violating the Geneva Conventions? The military for failing proportionality, or the militant group for failing distinction by hiding among civilians?
And that impossible gray area is exactly why the SRW includes these macro conflicts. From a human rights monitor's perspective, the geopolitical justifications just don't matter when the result is hundreds of dead children.
Right. The loss of life is the bottom line.
The SRW's stance is that when militaries or massive armed groups discard distinction and proportionality, the civilian is the victim either way. A human rights organization cannot advocate for targeted abuses if the basic right to life in the whole region is being wholesale discarded.
Whether it's a targeted assassination in a Syrian village or a massive military strike in Lebanon, the fundamental failure to protect civilian life is the ultimate human rights violation.
Exactly. The failure of macro-level distinction essentially enables the micro-level abuses.
It's all connected. If the Geneva Conventions are falling apart at the regional level, it creates the exact kind of fractured society where a farmer in Hama becomes an easy target.
It's one interconnected ecosystem of violence.
Which brings our journey through this report full circle, really. We've unpacked an immense amount of ground today.
We're covered a lot, yes.
We started with the quiet, bureaucratic ledgers of the Gulf, where the legal system is used to disappear academics and athletes. We moved into the fractured society of Syria, exploring localized terror and economic erasure.
And finally zoomed out to the massive war casualties in Iran and Lebanon.
Exactly. And for you listening, this matters because as consumers of information, understanding how human rights groups methodically track and verify this data helps us cut through the noise of international news. It forces us to see the human beings behind the statistics.
And as we conclude, there is one final incredibly haunting detail from the very beginning of the SRW report that we actually haven't discussed yet.
Oh, what's that?
In their methodology statement, the SRW explicitly notes that they refrained from mentioning certain violations in this month's report.
Wait, they left things out. Why?
They state they deliberately left incidents out because they lacked conclusive evidence. And this is despite the monitors being absolutely certain that those abuses actually occurred.
Wow, so this massive ledger, we just discussed all the names, the dates, the tragedies, that is only the baseline.
Yes, it is only what could be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. In criminology, they call it the dark figure of crime.
The dark figure.
Yeah, the vast amount of unreported or undiscovered offenses. What we read today is only the visible peak of a much larger mountain of systemic abuse.
It really exposes the severe limits of documentation. Some fractures don't leave a clean white line on the X-ray for us to point at. We invite you to ponder that chilling reality. For every thoroughly documented tragedy that survived the rigorous process to make it into this report, how many completely true, horrific stories are out there that will simply never be heard, just because the evidence didn't survive?